I would like to start with telling you what this evening is not about. This evening is not about a gallerist or an art historian interviewing an artist. I am not an art historian, I'm not a gallerist, and I do not like interviews. I like artists, she's an artist, as you know. So, what will we do? Actually, the idea is that we will talk. There will be questions and answers from both sides. And as an introduction, we decided to start with telling you how does it come that these two people will have a talk this evening.
It's very unusual for me to just be exposed in a conversation like this. I don't have any notes here, I don't have anything. I think he has a lot more on his lap than I do. What I felt about Giaco Schiesser the first time I met him, I realized that he had an inquiring mind. And one of the things that I asked myself, why do I make my life so difficult, asking myself questions all the time as an artist? And I've been doing this since I'm 11, and it hasn't gotten better, it's actually gotten worse. When I spoke to Giaco briefly, I felt like he has the same problem. To me, it was not a problem when I listened to him. I thought, oh, this was very encouraging. Somebody who is in the faculty that he's in has so many questions. And I decided I need to get to know this man. I wrote him, may I send you my book? And may I invite you to my exhibition in Milan? I think the first day I met him, I told him I want him to write about my new project. I told myself, don't ask him, but then I did. And here we are, having a conversation. I'd have a lot more to say, but it'll unfold, I guess.
The first time I met Angela, it was at this lecture or presentation in xenoculture. Then we were standing on a terrace. And if you're in an environment with artists, if artists start to talk with you, there are probably 2 or 3 possibilities. The first type of artist who is talking to you is not really interested in you because they think you are a bureaucrat. You do not know nothing about art if you are running an art department. The second type of artist is highly interested in you because they are looking for a job or for an opportunity that you can do something for them. And the third type is really very seldom that artists start a talk and stay in a certain way interested in what you are doing. So Angela was not so much interested in the first instance to tell me what she is doing. She was really interested in hearing more about what am I doing. And then we had a talk and I immediately felt that there is an urgency for her in her work. An urgency that is related to art and to the world beyond the art. And I had the feeling that this urgency, this felt of urgency, for her made a difference to many artists.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, of course.
I mean, before you gallop on, I think you hit a very important point. For myself as an artist, this urgency is not something I feel I've chosen really. And it's like carrying something that you've just got this sort of hump that you carry with you and what to do with that. And there is no choice about not dealing with it. I realized talking to Giaco that how crucial it is to have people with whom you can talk seriously about art, particularly today, because there's so much conversation that is just around making money, or which is also another part of it, but we're not talking about this at this moment, but about the earnestness. And I would say even that it has been in the last 20 years that this kind of relentless questioning has almost been sometimes considered a sign of you don't know what you want or you don't know what you're about. And so it's crucial, I think, for this deep, serious part of yourself as an artist that you have people that support that and are interested to share that. But it's a two-way street, it's a conversation, it's not just one way, as you said.
We take this as an entry point for our talk. We will talk about the latest work, Passage in the Wake of the World. And the title of this evening is Black Forest. And you will have to wait. At the very end, you will understand why we were talking about Black Forest, I promise you. And if you have the feeling during the talk, what the hell is going on, keep silent and stay relaxed, you will get it.
Okay. I'm going to read to you this, though. if that's okay. A single wooden crate carrying 20 paintings journeys from my studio to New York. Once landed, it transforms into a large vessel carrying 2 passengers. Having survived a wild storm, they find themselves stranded on the rocks in a state of amnesia. Slowly emerging from the unknown, they awaken to the painful realization of a world they have lost. Leaving the vessel in search of resolve, they come upon several cedar trees. Through an intoxicating assimilation with the branches, they are drawn into a strange state of euphoria. In their moment of relief and exaltation, they stumble upon Golden Child, a heavy bronze doll lying beneath a pile of rubble. Together, they retrieve the figure and carry it to the vessel under the weight of awareness. In solemn reflection, they walk slowly to the Black Mountain in search of new perspectives to reset the course of their journey.
I think the interesting thing is to start immediately to talk about the heavy terms that are in the title. Passage in the wake of the world. So maybe we start with the world. I mean, this is a big term. What kind of world is at stake here for you?
The information one is receiving every day about our world is getting under our skin. And I wonder, what do we do with that? I wonder how that affects other people. And I examine that through my own dialogue with the world. In some ways, from a very small window. It brings me to say something very Chinese. It's a little bit of a sidestep, but the Chinese say, if you want to understand society, look at the family. These small structures that then, seen in the bigger picture, can sometimes open your vision to universal things. I'd like to backtrack a little bit. In 2019, I did an exhibition called In the Blue that Marco here tried to curate me. We did a walk together about the waters rising. Will we still be able to love each other? That was the core of my text to that subject. And Marco had taken me to the Gempen outside of Basel, and we stood up there on a crazy day and looked out. It was an electric blue light, and I envisioned that the whole Jura Valley just filled up with water. And it was such a powerful image that it triggered a whole series of paintings called In the Blue, and then I asked Marco if he would walk with me and curate this show. In that narrative, I said, I'm going to build a boat and invite you to sit next to me and look out. When the water rises, what are we going to do? I thought, I'm going to build a boat. And I guess you will also be in the same predicament as me if the water rises over a large area. So I planned to build the boat, and I talked about it in that exhibition. 2 years later, on the Edge of Time, I did build the raft, and it looks out onto the paintings I did inspired by the Jura. In this very opulent exhibition with 25 rooms, it was sort of the last bash of the great days. I sort of used the Baroque setting to suggest that, the great party before major change. I feel we're in a moment of major change and transition. Hard to imagine somebody not feeling that. Passage in the wake of the world, it would be about choices. I would reduce my work down to a single crate. This is a brand new picture taken yesterday morning in my studio. The things are almost ready to go out into the world with this project. The storm raged with no beginning, no end. We tied ourselves to the mast. The darkness churning us inside out. We had fallen asleep on the edge of time. dreaming of another world. We woke. The vessel slumped on the rock. Our breath weaving threads into the cool morning air. We had thrown everything overboard. Everything. Who are we? Where are we going? What is the measure? Will we still love each other when the water rises?
We are coming up now with a project which is called The Passage in the Wake of the World. And interestingly, the English term of wake has three completely different meanings. It means in German Kielwasser, which is close to the boat. Second, funeral feast. And thirdly, it means, or it is related to wake up. And these three meanings are so hugely different. And to have it in one work is an interesting example of different layers.
It's a title that has a lightness to it as well, although it has all this heaviness as well. And wake up as a wake-up call. I love this thing when you go in a boat and you see this movement of the water that you create with the boat moving through. So the visual aspect of that word I liked, and probably quite a strong Asian influence in my work that I'm trying to always catch the space between, so the suggestion of something rather than hammering in information. So this title is able to swim through and take lots of ideas with it, because I'm not really assuming answers with this project. It's more my basically human concern is like, well, we're in tricky waters, I guess.
There are two worlds at stake here in this project, as you can easily understand, because there's a world from where the boat starts, then there's a passage, and there is another world then. So the question is, the world where the project starts, actually this is the world we are living in, but what is the idea of the world at the end of the passage? And when I started to think about this, my question was, what is the imagination of Angela? Does she think of this second world as the promised land where the passengers will arrive? Does she think there will be hell, a utopia, something new, or a dystopia, or nothing at all? And is this pre-decided? So as a pessimist, I would say we do not even know whether our world will exist in 10 or 15 years. This is what is at stake. So then the journey becomes the goal. Nothing like another world outside, but the journey itself, because we have to navigate, not to get to a goal outside or beyond our times, but to build up or to find out whether this world will and can exist anymore. Is this something you would say this is too pessimistic to bring up this question?
No, the response I'd give to that has many layers. My own life story, I've never quite believed in certainty. The part of my brain doesn't compute that tomorrow is. And I think it's part of also what drove me to be an artist, because every work you do, once it's done, that's done, and you don't know exactly what the next work will be or how you're going to do it. So you're always living on this edge somehow as an artist. I think in terms of the world, in terms of, you asked me, so what do I expect with this passage? There is no certainty. But there is, as you say, perhaps the journey, and what can one do in this journey, what happens with others. So that's why I said I'll build a boat and invite you to sit next to me to look out. So it has to do with you and me. The passengers are you and me, basically. So it could be you and me, or whoever you and me happens to be. It's 2 dancers. I'm working with a choreographer from the Miami City Ballet, trained in classical dance.
I am currently working on a new collaboration with artist Angela Lyn and composer Jessie Bannister titled Passage in the Wake of the World. We are currently living in an ever-changing and troubled world, and to me this project comments on how we as human beings can respond and take action. Through Angela's beautifully intricate and moving paintings and Jessie's emotionally driven, dynamic, and profound music, I hope to connect these 2 worlds through movement and dance. What excites me about this project is that it is so different from what I usually do in creating classical ballets that are presented on the stage in a theater, and in this, it is forcing me outside of my comfort zone to collaborate in a new way and to work with 2 other talented artists and to try to bridge that gap between our disciplines. Angela spoke a lot to me about her process of painting and how each individual brushstroke creates this beautiful picture by the end. And there are a lot of parallels with ballet in this way, in that each and every step comes together to make this beautiful phrase of movement and music by the end. And so I've taken a lot of inspiration from that. I should also mention that it is amazing that the 3 of us are coming together in this way, all of us from different generations, but all 3 of us of half Asian descent, and I think that will be really special to share this piece of art with these 2 other artists in that way. I'm very excited to continue exploring and working on this project, and I think that it will continue to evolve and grow as we continue our work on it in a very meaningful and special way.
And I met him and he said, I've been waiting for something like this for a while, to do something different that is outside of the sort of the standard formula of classical ballet in the stage performance. So he is choreographing alongside the musician Jessie Bannister, where we are preparing this work together of these, the you and me that wake up on in this vessel. I'm interested also in what people do when things go wrong. How do we respond to each other when things are not how we would like them to be, when diverse things happen? And I think it also can bring out very powerful sides in people, very strong sides, and also encouraging sides. Where that will lead, I'm not giving an answer to that.
There's a starting point, then there is a passage with a goal, and the goal is somewhere else. And I would say, generally, we are in a situation where the starting point got lost, and the future in a certain way vanishes. So the journey and the boat becomes the crucial issue. And if we then would move for a moment to the boat, you say it's a vessel. Normally, a vessel is steered by the passengers who are on the boat. Who are the passengers? And if the boat is not really a vessel anymore, in the sense that it cannot be a vessel anymore, it is more a raft, which is driven by the currents and undercurrents of the sea. And the passengers do not know where they get. Then, of course, it becomes crucial who is on the boat and how do the passengers deal with this situation.
What's interesting about this project is there's the reality and the metaphor. So it really is a crate with 20 paintings in it. And then there's the metaphoric layer that it's carrying also the story in the wake of the world. Is it a raft or is it a boat? Who's driving it? That's a many-layered question, and it's great, Giaco, that you ask that many questions, because I ask so many questions, and every question you've asked me, I've asked myself many times. I think it's something that we have lost a bit in our conversations around art, that people dare to ask clear questions. Why are you doing this, or what you're doing, or what's happening here? They get stuck on the rocks, and they don't know who they are, or where they came from, or where they're going. It doesn't have a beginning, and it doesn't have an end as such. But what happens is crucial. How they experience the moment that they spend on this boat.
The boat being a raft and not so much a vessel that is driven by people, but a raft that is driven by currents and undercurrents and by storm. And there's this famous building by Giaco, the raft of Medusa. One crucial issue of this painting is what is happening with the people on the raft. The result is they fight against each other, and it starts cannibalism. This raft of Medusa is a metaphor for the state of the art of our society, that cannibalism is everywhere. So cannibalism may be one perspective. I suppose that is not so much the perspective you intend that should happen.
Oh, I'm vegetarian. But it's a great... It's a great question, Giaco. My experience when, in general, in the small perspective of people, of you and me in everyday life, is when things are really ugly, people are actually, basically will not be ugly to each other. In big institutional stuff, yes, but in the everyday passage of human beings. So if two people get stranded on an island, are they going to eat each other? Probably stupid to do that. My story goes out that they actually become solidary, my two dancers. They first are busy with themselves, and then they get in this euphoria, they are full of themselves, and then they reach their limits somehow and get stuck. And then they realize that they do better with each other. So there's a beautiful passage that Durante is choreographing. They are moving each other's feet. I like this idea of taking this classical ballet that, you know, when somebody can be on points and have their feet up in the air, that the other foot would be close to somebody's mouth. So this kind of dialogue between feeding and this passage walking. I'm really excited about answering some of the questions that Giaco is presenting in terms of bodily response, because painting is also a performance. The way I paint has a lot to do with marking space, so it's very precise how long I do a line. I'm imagining it has a choreographic aspect to it. So. In this sudden euphoria that they cannot get higher, it all collapses and they suddenly see all this mess that is strewn around the raft. If you're in a storm, to throw off the boat everything you don't need and tie down what you need and then tie yourself to the mast. But by all means, do not abandon your boat.
It's interesting, it's important to bind yourself at the mast, because if you are not doing this, then you are seduced by the muse, like in Odysseus. So you have to keep on track and not to get seduced. But it would be interesting to also think the other way around. Would be not only the danger of the muses, but also the potential of the muses to get seduced by them and to unbind. Let me add one sentence that comes into my mind. Doing the same thing but differently, again and again. This is a mapping. This is developing a territory by developing the mapping while going into this space. So in a certain way, this is also a passage all the time.
I mean, it's a thought I've had for myself for a long time about the idea of mapping by observation. Those of you who know me, you know, outside my studio, I have these cedar trees, and I've been looking at them now for 20 years, and they are becoming a sort of means of mapping out these kind of thoughts that you're talking about. There are so many ways to examine what you see. So there's many ways to respond to what's happening as well. For me, a painting is a possibility to open up a conversation with you or you about what is happening in us, around us, or with us. And so, for example, this painting here, this is one of the major works that will be in the show. It's 2 meters high, and the individual pieces are 46 centimeters wide. An interruption of the movement of these branches. So I've taken the fragments, and sometimes they follow through, and sometimes they don't. So this subtle disruption has to do with not knowing how does the story unfold, and that this is a common state. We have never known how it's unfolded to some degree, but it's on a level of consciousness that is very impactful at the moment. I want to ask you a question. Where do you see that I respond to the world in what I'm painting? Like, let's take this painting, for example. Is that, you mentioned something about it being a harbor and being a storm at the same time for the vessel, which was, I found, a nice observation.
The question is, on the one hand, very easily to answer. Of course, I think so. That is why I'm interested in your work. I think your work is highly political, but in a sense that not a lot of people nowadays think politics. There are two ways of political art, in my opinion, and this was nicely described already in the 60s by Jean-Luc Godard, when he said, in our days it is important not to make political art, but to make art politically. Political art means you use art as an instrument to deliver to people a certain idea. They should believe the idea you have, and you use art as an instrument. And you do not believe in aesthetics, that aesthetics in itself actually has or could have a power. And this is the other way around. To do art politically means exactly that. You can take, in a certain way, any kind of idea you are interested in, and then to think about why I'm dealing with this question in our times. With aesthetic means, then it can or it could become very political. And in that sense, I think your work is highly political, because the questions you are dealing with are at stake for the moment. I mean, the world is changing a lot. We talked about this a little bit. And you are doing this by artistic means. So looking at this painting, I would say the longer you look at it, the stranger, it looks back in a certain way. So you can look for hours. And I mean, this is an example, or let's say one of the criteria of good art is there is a complexity in a work that you cannot embrace in a second or by looking at it once or 2 times or 3 times. You have to look at it many times. Also play a different role in which age you are when you looked at the same piece again.
We talked quite often about the artifact. What results out of all these questions and inquiries? Also, what is then the painting? I have the feeling I'm getting ever more driven by this hunger for detail and exact. I've talked to you a lot of times about that, and I wonder, what is it that makes me want to paint with such exactness? If you, looking back in the history of painting, often painters started out very carefully and they got very wild as they got older. I'm going in the other direction, and I think it has to do, this is a reflection or an inquiry in our time, that there's so much information that's foggy and so many thinking processes that are somehow don't connect or they don't click, that I'm chasing after this exactness in my painting, and to a point that it's almost, I would say, on the edge of being neurotic sometimes. There's these tiny brushes. How do you see this exactness in my work in terms of what it conveys?
The first term that comes into my mind is stubbornness. Eigensinn in German. The interesting thing about stubbornness is normally it's a negative term. Most people understand under stubbornness something negative. For me, it's completely the other way around. It's a positive thing. Eigensinn means, first of all, you stay with your senses and you give meaning to things and you stick to something. You have an intuition or a feeling, sometimes even a knowledge. You have to deal with these issues again and again, and the painters who are working that way, I mean, there are different ways of painting, but in your case, to paint the setters again and again, you could say, well, come on, she is crazy. She should develop, she should finally do something else. Or you could say, there is something in that does not come to an end in a certain way. So they are, in this repetition, there is a difference made for her and also for the viewer. A second aspect, which is highly interesting, is compared to someone who is writing a scientific text, you need the computer and you need normally your hands to write something down and then you print it and people read it. If you are working as an artist and especially as a painter, so you have the brushes and the colors and so on, there is something like a sensuous knowledge in the hands. The hands that are doing this work have an Eigensinn compared to your intellect or to your mind. So there is an interplay between your hand, which is not only the instrument who is doing the painting, but there is a backlash, so to say, or a loop back, that the hands are telling you something. You can answer in a similar way what is the difference between art and science. Science delivers you a written text and you use your eyes. This is the sense you need. But you read the text and then in a certain way you have to digest mentally. If you look at a painting, if you go to the theater, if you listen to a piece of music, then something different is happening. You are embraced and influenced and infiltrated in a certain way by different senses. So something goes directly to your stomach or your heart or whatever. So, and this is, for this, the term sensuous knowledge.
I think that's one of the main reasons why, for me, painting is relevant today. Make you wonder when I'm there for hours with this little brush going like this, what the heck am I doing in this day and age doing that? And maybe with my brain and my time, I could be more effective. But it's exactly this ownness of between the hand and the mind that still is, it has something cohesive that in all of our information that we have that is becoming very polarized in our brains, this has a language that again pulls these things together. And I think that's important. For me, very important to talk about that as well with as somebody outside of my brain as well. This is not just in the work, but it's an important theme. Why art or why painting now?
We talked also, of course, about, if you stay with the metaphor, not only the metaphor, with literacy, that there is a boat in the water, and we talked about that this is a kind of an abyss, an Abgrund. And then I had the idea to say, well, Abgrund normally also means, like with Eigensinn, this is something negative. You do not want to fall into an Abgrund. But what about thinking the other way around, about the productivity, about the quality of the abyss, of the Abgrund? And with the water, the sea, the boat is driven on. There's a whole underworld on which this boat is placed, actually. And to look at this underworld not only as something dangerous, but as something that has a quality for the boat.
Our lake in Lugano is 300 meters deep in its deepest part. It's very deep. And when I'm lying on the water, I always think of how much water there is carrying me. So some people might feel, oh my God, there's so far to fall down into this water. And I always think, oh my God, there's so much water underneath me carrying it. So I like this ambiguity of the possibility there. One of the questions that drives me around the theme of the abyss is, how do we talk about difficult things altogether? And we are surrounded by information. Just for example, the war that we have going on very close to us in Europe, it just sort of runs along parallel on the radio in the morning, and it's happening, and yet this information doesn't get in, really. And so how do we manage to get information inside? I think if you're going to communicate with people about things that are dark or difficult, the difficult things about our human existence, if you come just with a hammer, most of the time people will go like that. So one of my ideas is, if I want to talk about disruption, it's a difficult theme. So somewhere one has to go gently into these places. You cannot just rip someone. In contrary to our news today that just bombards images with no follow-up. They're seen and disappear so quickly. It gets forgotten so quickly, stuff that's happened. And it's impressive how difficult it is, I think, to absorb information on a deep level. And I think it's something that in this period we're in of transition is going to be crucial. As we are in these difficult passages, that we are able to exchange on a human level that is halfway, that is meaningful, or it's going to connect.
It becomes very dangerous, but it could be the other way around. How all things are related together. If you make a move there, it has an impact on what is there. The abyss has an impact on the boat. You mentioned the example that the Lugano is very deep, and if you're on a boat on the sea, and if you think about how deep this is, this has an impact how you deal with the situation and how you sail, and so. And this gives an idea how all the things in a certain way are related. And only within the last decade in the Western world, this idea has been taken up again. The Western world was very good in separating things, in going into focuses, but then the problem was to deal different aspects not related. Medicine is a really very good example. Most of the medicine in the Western world, you have separate people who can dealing with separate parts of the human body, but to integrate it, there always have been doctors as well, but the mainstream was completely different. In Asia, this is a very different situation, and I think this is one part of your multitude that comes from this Asian tradition, where it is in everyday life for everyone clear that all the things are related together. And for us, it's a hard way to come back in a certain way to this situation, or to this understanding.
I think we should ask also if somebody has any questions about what we've been talking about, or questions about this project.
Or if you're upset, if you disagree, please come up with your anger. And
do you intend this complexity? Are you aware of different layers, or is it the result of sticking to the project for years and years and decades, and over time this complexity just shows up, maybe to your own surprise?
The interplay between realities is something that is very natural when you're a child. And I think when you are an artist and you keep that part of you stimulated, things going on, it's like a narration that spreads out and mixes, and there's no boundaries. I have problems anyway with boundaries. I don't see boundaries very well, probably my mixed culture and everything. I would not say that it's conscious, I'm looking for complexity. No, it's more that I'm looking to embrace or to bring something into a cohesion where I feel it makes sense. How to bring this into a cohesion that's simple as well. I actually strive, I would say, I strive a certain simplicity in my images, but that still leave space for the complexities to breathe inside. Complexity is invisible to some degree. You know that from your work. I mean, there's something diffuse, and you cannot resolve it by pinpointing it. So I think that's where art becomes very important, to leave space for these complexities, that it can breathe, it can be without nailing it down. And sort of saying, this complexity is the AYZ and this is the 145, that somehow these things can breathe between each other. And still, they have a clarity that pulls them through. That's perhaps one of the most interesting things about when to finish a painting. Suddenly it gets a certain clarity, and it feels like all the things have just suddenly come into focus, and the thing jumps off and it's its own work. And then it doesn't need to be, it needs to be left alone, and then I have nothing more to do with it anymore, which is also weird.
Can I add something? When I fell in love with Angela, I was a young medical student, and I was sometimes at times desperate because I had to learn a lot of things, and I was always studying, and it was very hard. And then I fell in love with this artist, with this young art student, and it struck me because I thought the artist is kissed by the muse. And it struck me, she got up with me in the morning and she started to paint or to work. And there was an immense amount of work that she put in there. And I saw that she was working harder. It came to my mind when you said the complexity. She was working very hard on these paintings, and it was a very complex thought behind it from the very word go. And I remember she used to turn paintings around and repaint them and paint over them, and it was a very strong process.
I'd just like to add to that, though, for me, it's the biggest success if somebody who has no idea about art comes along and is completely taken in as well. So for me, that's a measure of when something works. It's the expert who has a very differentiated view, but also somebody who doesn't have all the back feed, who just looks and thinks, how do you say, as it touches?
It moves, it's better.
It moves me. So.
I can add two aspects about the question of complexity. I mean, we are talking, or we should talk about two different complexities. The one complexity is in the questions you have. And if you are not a naive artist, then you know that any question you want to deal with as an artist is highly complex. This is the complexity in the topic you are dealing with. And the other kind of complexity, and I think you were talking about both in a certain way, is the complexity of a work. How is this done consciously or not? And then the next question, of course, is when or why does an artist know when to stop? I can tell you, nobody knows. It's a combination, looking from outside now as a cultural theorist, I would say it's a combination of intuition and experience. You have done a lot of work, and then you have the feeling from your experiments you have done and from the experiences you gained, this is the moment to stop. And if you try to start to talk with an artist, why? You will rarely get an answer, or an answer that is not satisfactory. It is also the case that there is no single point. I mean, there I would say different artworks that stop at a different moment are interesting, both of them. For some artworks, I mean a Mona Lisa, you would say, well, this is at the point, there could not be a variation. In other examples, there are variations. Nowadays, a lot of artists are talking about work in progress, and then they fix a certain moment, and then they stop it, and then they work again on this work. In a certain way, you can say you're dealing with the setters. These are variations, but with a lot of differences, and each of them are valid, and there's no, you cannot say this is the final result of your dealing with the setters.
Well, it depends what I want to say, or what my inquiry is, how it turns out. I'd like to share my most weird painting moment with you, because I think it's taken me a long time to even dare to recognize it, and to share it publicly is a sign of old age, but I'm very happy to be able to share it. So my day looks like this. I'm at that point where you shouldn't overcook the marmalade. I have a deadline because I now do projects, and I don't paint over things actually. I used to, but now it happens more in my mind, the slow walk to finishing a work. So the final stage is where I go around, like if this show would be a show getting ready to go away, I go around the whole room doing things. And it's only recently that I've come to realize how mad this must seem, and so chaotic in a way. And I'm trying to understand myself. I sometimes send Giaco these weird voice messages like, what is going on in my mind, that I might have a bit of yellow, and I think, oh, this bit of yellow also has to go there. I mean, if you would take that out of context, you'd say this is not serious painting, but it's extremely serious painting, because this is fine bringing together of the relationship between things and the dosages. It's the marmalade, it's the cooking of the marmalade. And it's taken me, I'm painting my whole life, to understand this naturally. This desire to find out and to follow something through. I would say it's because I am stubborn that I've stuck to that, because today it seems like there's been a lot of taboo when people go to art exhibitions, that you sort of sit around and clink glasses, but there's not a lot of conversation about, actually, I don't know what the heck this is going on here. It doesn't really touch me, or it does touch me, or it's interesting and not interesting, or what's happening. Do you feel it's important to explore these things in terms of how we experience art, to go into an exchange, or you think art should just be what it is?
There is an architect friend here, right? So I'm an architect too, and as an architect, I'm made to solve problems, right? And probably as an artist, you are more made to create problems. So in my job, it is about beauty, about what you like. And Harald Seemann used to say art is about what you don't like. So I'm not sure I like your work, but I'm not supposed to like it. And when it is not about liking, it is a way of liking. So on the finity or the infinity of work. When you think about our job, in this case, our job is finished when the problem is solved. But what is the problem? Generally you get a program, right? You get a program by the client, and then you solve it, and then okay, the client is happy. But the reason why we as architects keep running behind the artists, right, which is reality, artists run ahead of us, and now we are trying to catch them by bringing them into our projects and collaborate with them, is because they are ahead of us as architects. I've been liking, of course, your work in the sense that it didn't let me still, right? There are things in your work that have always kept asking questions. So, why do you separate the works? Why is there the Triptychon was a thing on Vater, Sohn und der Heilige Geist, or there was, there's this kind of division in our society. Where is the division? The two fingers of, we've been talking about the Cappella Sistina, and And that kind of thing, when we were standing there in the blue, it was so cold and you had the feeling you would die, that in your painting, which were so beautiful, or in that sense complete, they were missing pieces. I mean, they all fit, but of course, here they don't. And then you begin to think, okay, what's missing there? Why is something missing here? And is there an ugly piece missing that you have taken out? And is that something that in 500 years people will understand why you have not painted it? So on the completeness of your work, I think the work is complete in the moment where it's still not complete in the sense of not letting people feel that art is okay and is there.
You just triggered one thought to me about these missing pieces. One of the things I've questioned a lot is the relationship between love and fear in terms of art and in terms of human expression as such. My early work was very much connected with fear until I was about probably 40, 38. It was driven by a lot of dark drive. And then I wondered if love is a source of a creative response. And I think one of the things is that the idea that you think you know is one of the most unloving things you can do to anything. I know what you are. I know who you are. Hast schon alles gewusst, and this is classical that, I mean, men and women do this, or men and men, or couples do that to each other. Yeah, I know who you are, and I know you. It's the most unloving thing, I think. And I feel like when I'm painting something, it's the journey of realizing how much I don't know about what I'm looking at. That has to do with opening a sense of loving something, to be deeply curious then about that. To say, well, so this interruption or leaving pieces open is a way of saying, I'm trying to follow you, I'm trying to go where you go, but then there's a piece missing. And it also leaves space for the viewer to go in. I feel that that's the triangle somewhere. I am involved with the viewer when I'm looking at something. It's about you and me on the boat. Whether you're a doctor or you're doing Werbung or whatever. I'd just like to say a point about our host here, Julia. She is a young gallerist and very dedicated. It's fantastic for me at my age to meet somebody her age that has this sense of inquiry to create evenings like she does, and the conversations. And I think it's your interest and your engagement, Julia, that also makes me feel comfortable to talk about my weird moment where I run around and do these last moments on a piece of work, a mixture of nervousness and odd clarity at the same time. Yeah, thank you, Julia, for hosting us and giving also the possibility to talk about things like this with the public. I think it's important. Julia, maybe you can just give a quick word about our fundraising for our project, seeing as that was also this part of this project.
So we do fundraising for this project in order to support all of the involved parties. There are three possibilities to support the project. So you can acquire the artworks, the beautiful artworks which are displayed. And another thing is we have slippers from the previous exhibition at Villa Arconati, the one you saw. So Angela takes the slippers on a journey. You can write a message with raising a question like, how do you go through the crisis?
Your response to transition and whatever you would want to give along in this passage movement with this project. It's been very nice. People have sent me things to put in there. I'm a little bit scared about this whole thing. In the end, you start a project and then it grows, and then suddenly we are negotiating to present this in Miami, and there's this and that, and maybe it's all going to work and maybe it's all going to not work. And it usually does work, but you never know. So the accompaniment of these thoughts is very nice. I sometimes think that, I'm listening to Giaco, and I have to say, it's wonderful to have conversations with people who you can have next to you in your mind and still think. And that's probably why I felt I could have a free conversation, because I can somehow think and talk with you like it's in my own mind about my work. I'd just like to add a little bit to this project about the mixture of performance and why I want to put together a choreography with the paintings. And that has to do with getting out of this sort of standard setting of looking at paintings in a gallery or in a set space, but to kind of bring again the possibility to experience these things in another format. So, yeah.
Maybe we finish with a paradox.
Yes.
I promised at the beginning, at the very end, they would have understood why this talk was called
A Black Mountain.
A Black Mountain. With the paradox that we have not mentioned the word up to now, or the term up to now.
That's right.
And give us just a slight idea
Yes.
why this was all about Black Mountain.
I live in Ticino. There are mountains still in Ticino that are black. There's nobody living on them. The Black Mountain on one side is this huge, undetermined body. At the other side, it has something incredibly trustworthy. It's full of uncertainty, but somehow the earth carries. So for me, the Black Mountain, in terms of mountain, it's this body that is full of unknown, but it carries. It's something trustworthy. In terms of the conversation, Giaco, being an artist is a lot about walking, about traversing this Black Mountain, because even though I do that all my life, I still feel every time I don't know how things are going to go out. My first teacher at college, she said, "You're only as good as your next painting." Well, good is a bit of a weird word, but it's that feeling of not knowing how you're going to handle things. It's forcing you every time to start again from scratch, kind of. And that to me is being in the Black Mountain, in this, you don't know where your feet go really. You kind of get to know your feet, but you never quite know where you're putting them down as you find your way. Thank you.